And this is not just in terms of civil engagement, it's also in terms of civility. In the summer, this last summer, Twitter had to change its rules about hate speech in order to address an issue that was becoming more and more of a problem, which was people had found a way to be offensive to other religious groups by referring to them as animals. It wasn't obvious to the algorithms of Twitter how you exclude such terminology because it's an animal and it's a religious group. It doesn't, you know. So they had to find a new way to ban this, and this is the kind of things they had to ban in July 2019. And finally, and most curiously, we are becoming disconnected from sexual partners. You would have thought that the millennials and Generation Z would have had the best sex lives imaginable. That they would be enjoying the fact that their parents are on their phones and too busy to take any notice. They have never been left alone so much. Why aren't they having more sex? And it turns out they're having way less sex, and all of the data point in the same direction. And there are a number of different explanations for this. But what seems to be the theme behind them is that having an actual relationship with someone, as opposed to easily looking at some pornography, is much more messy. It's much more demanding. And many people would rather just avoid the mess. Okay, so that's a picture of the internet. We looked at 4 characteristics of the digital age. Now, let's bring back identity. What does this do to identity formation? So I would like to argue that if we go back to those dimensions, we can see that it took tensions that already existed and has shifted them around in quite dramatic ways. So if we look at continuity, that is where we find our balance between who I am now and who I am then. The internet age is one in which I'm living in a constant now. It never switches off. I'm constantly required to answer and to respond. I have to be in these digital relationships with multiple people all the time. I have to be on call. And I don't have a moment to think about me then. And if you like, if I'm going to push this metaphor maybe a little bit too far, imagine this rope being pulled between then and now. So the now is pulling in all different directions, tugging away at a very fast rate. And that sounds kind of like an exhausting experience. And there's another element to it. Is not only are we living in a continuous now, there's the threat at any moment that without our planning, something from the then could come and hit us over the head. Because everything that we've ever done or ever had online could suddenly be retrieved from the cloud, an embarrassing picture, an embarrassing video, something that we wrote, something that we said, and it could be brought back, and we could be shown it, and it could be part of us. And this is happening more and more as universities and employers are going onto YouTube and onto social media to check out applicants. And they can go back 10, 20 years to the digital record and see what they can find. So it's, on the one hand, there's all this exhausting now, and we've moved all the way over there. And on the other hand, we could all be hit over the head at any moment from something from the then. Sounds exhausting and very stressful. Authenticity. As you saw in the movie, in that clip, constantly choosing the right light, putting on the right filters, sending it to the right people, changing the way I look in order to fit in with the group that I'm communicating with, not only is tiring and stressful, but it also makes me hyper-aware of the fact that I am performing. I don't think we've ever been more aware that our presentations of self are indeed a performance. And so that sense is one that you can imagine on that tension between how I feel inside and how I'm perceived on the outside. I'm working very, very hard on that outside. And I'm feeling that gap very, very strongly. If I were to try and imagine that metaphor, it's as if this rope has never been so taut. It's so tight, it's near splitting point. And finally, on individuality, there is at the level of rhetoric and desire, us wanting to be individual, or these teams wanting to be individual and stand out as being a unique person. But at the same time, the pace and the requirement of constantly being socially engaged on these social media means that they are probably the most conformist generation we've seen for a long time. And so again, there is a tension here between feeling that I'm supposed to be over here, but I've been pulled all the way over to here. So it's as if the we part of that rope has won the tug of war, and it's gone slack on the I. But the person who's in the middle is very aware that something's amiss, something's not right. So to come back to F. Scott Fitzgerald, are we cracking up? Well, certainly there are those who say we are, famously so. Sherry Turkle has been making a very good business out of, first of all, being a big booster of the internet and saying how wonderful it was and it was going to be so playful, we were going to have these multiple identities and it was all going to be great. And then is now saying, this is terrible, we're alone. It's as if we're together, we're alone. And this is doing terrible things to us, we have to do something about it. Or the internet narcissism. We've seen many headlines like this, these big, shocking headlines telling us something terrible is happening. But then there are those, mainly from the research community, those few people who are doing serious research on this, who say, hang on a minute, this is a little early to say. This was an article that was published in the British Medical Journal, saying the debate over digital technology in young people needs less shock and more substance. Most of the data on which people are relying, including some of the data I presented here, are data that you guys in this room understand is data of associations. These are correlations. These are not data about causality. And none of these are experimental studies. We're just comparing something that's happened in society with something that we think has happened on the internet. Jean Twenge actually makes a very strong case in her book, iGen. And she says, I didn't come in looking for the internet. I came looking, as I've done for years, looking at generational change and generational differences in social data. Something happened around 2012, 2013, where everything suddenly went downhill. And I tried to figure out what it was. She tried to figure out, is it something to do with the economic problems? Is it to do with unemployment? No. Turns out the only explanation she could find is the fact that smartphones in 2012 became, over 50% of teens in 2012 began to have a smartphone. They're now at 84%. So these researchers were saying, hang on a second, we need much more serious data, we need much more serious data. However, there are some data which are genuinely worrying. This is one of them. The bottom line, first of all, are just the metric here. This is the hours a day on an electronic device or internet use between 2013 and 2015, between no hours and 5+ hours. The bottom line is the percentage of teens who are unhappy, who declare themselves to be unhappy. And the top line is the percentage of teens who have at least one factor of risk in suicide. So you know that there are these several factors that one would look at to see if someone is a suicide risk. And at least one of these factors is evident. That's this line over here, showing that, and we have actually seen very hard data about the fact that suicide among teens has grown dramatically. Murder is down, teenage pregnancy is down, car accidents are down, drink is down, drugs are down. They are probably the safest generation of children we've ever seen for years, but they're more at risk of killing themselves than any generation that's preceded them. So something is definitely amiss. So even though we do have to take some more research, it's not all rosy. So what do we do about this? Here we are in a school of education. The first thing is that we cannot ignore it. Or can we? The first thing we could do is what we're doing right now. Nothing. Pretend this doesn't exist. Recognize that cell phones are a problem, but only because people take them out in our lectures and aren't concentrating on the study that I'm trying to describe to them about teen suicide. It's an option. The next option is to limit cell phone use. And here I'm going to show you a clip from two of the greatest experts that we know on internet use among teens. This is a debate between Jean Twenge and Nir Eyal. Nir Eyal, for those of you who don't know him, is a very interesting entrepreneur of Israeli background who's been based in America for years. He spent the first half of his career advising tech companies how to make their apps so hook you so well that you'll never want to put it down. And he's now spending having a second career advising the rest of the public about how to resist the tech companies when they try and hook you. His latest book is called Hooked. The book he's currently writing is called Indistractable, just to give you a sense of what it is. So these two guys, Gene Twenge, who's a real expert on Generation Z, and Nir Eyal, they're being interviewed, and they actually have very different opinions about whether tech is good or bad. This is their advice at the end when they're asked, what do we do so that our children can be safe?
Do and when you will do it. It's amazing how many we've done the things we really want to get done, the important things. Then we remove those external triggers that we talked about earlier. And finally, we use PACT. We use technology against itself, apps like Forest that you mentioned earlier, to make sure we stay in to the task that we're focused on. Yeah.
So, in summary, I know we could talk a lot longer. Nir said earlier, like, damn, I wish this was for 2 hours. In summary, is there any other advice that you would want to share with us on how do we use technology in a more healthful manner? Anything else you want to add?
I don't know. I mean, I think I mentioned the 2 big things already. It's the phones out of the bedroom and making sure that we all get that good night's sleep and don't have technology interfere with that. And just trying to cut down on use, and I'll have all your practical suggestions to do that.
I kind of gave my greatest hits already, but this.
Don't take it into the bedroom. Try and use it less. That's what we got. That's limiting. However, limiting might even be a better idea if we didn't know from other cultures and societies that it really doesn't work. Those who studied with me this morning were in a conversation with some people from the ultra-Orthodox community in Jerusalem who were describing the effects of the internet on their community. And we just spent a long time discussing the ban on the internet and the ban on cell phones in the ultra-Orthodox community in Israel. What you see before you hear is a kosher phone. In order to cut down on internet use, because it exposes people to elements of society that the ultra-Orthodox is very keen to keep out because of its bad cultural influence on that community, which is a segregated community, they have all sorts of measures. They tried originally banning the internet, but the grassroots didn't accept the rabbi's ban, and they saw that they were losing the battle. They then said, it's okay, you can have cell phones, but only certain kinds of cell phone. No cell phone that has an internet connection. They tried that. Didn't work. And these flip phones actually are an example. Is that they are taking us back to those first ones that imitated Star Trek back in the 90s. And they're just eliminating the internet. But then people said, no, but I need to get places. I need to pay my bills. I need people to be able to access my business. I can't live without the internet. And now there is a very active business in creating smartphones that are highly sophisticated in every way, except they rule out social media apps, or they rule out access to the internet. But what we learned this morning, and what I was already suspecting before our conversation this morning, is that limiting, even though that's an extreme case, limiting doesn't work. You cannot put the genie back in the bottle. You can teach moderation, but it will have to be moderation in a much more general sense. It's not going to be a solution over a long term.